I have worked for Microsoft coming up for 3 years now. I was brought into a team called DP, which is the same team that Josh works in, with the job title of Creative Technologist. My aim there was to take a look at Microsoft technologies, see where we could be humanly interesting with them. So there's a lot of people within Microsoft who are frighteningly clever. That's one of the advantages of working there. There's a lot of people that understand the very detailed technical specifications that we have behind our products. And so what I was looking to do was to surface some of the human side of it. How could we actually use these products in the real world? How could we put them into scenarios that people would find interesting and that would understand them? So I got to play around for a couple of years doing that, and it was a great time. I played with Connect. I played with Windows Phone before it was released. And in the last sort of year or so, I've been playing around with Windows 8. A lot of the things that people have been talking about today, I've been using Windows 8 as my main operating system for about a year now, so it's all very natural to me at the moment. So but I recognise there's no stupid questions when it comes to it. Saying that, however, events like this, talking to other people and hearing what other people have to say about it, you still always learn something new from whatever it is that anybody's going to say. So I want to just bring up this 5 principles here that we talk about when creating applications for Windows 8. But there are also principles which come across from Windows Phone too. This notion of pride and craftsmanship, thinking about every single pixel that you place on the screen, thinking about the typographic layout, thinking about the grid, that invisible grid that's in the background, supporting the hierarchy of content. This notion of fast and fluid, of being able to flow through an application, of a user being able to achieve a goal quite beautifully, simplifying the interaction within an application too. Being authentically digital, recognizing these are digital devices, that you can pick it up, that it's got sensors, it's got a camera built into it, it's got a GPS, it knows who I am, it knows where I am. But also recognizing these are pixels on a screen. This isn't a page turning, maybe like our calendars don't have ring binders down the middle, like Bill mentioned this morning, this notion of skeuomorphism. We don't have ring binders down the middle with pages, and as you turn the page, you get the rustling of paper. These are digital devices. We have this notion of doing more with less, reducing some of the chrome that we have on the interfaces and making the content the key. And finally, winning as one. So taking advantage of some of the search charms, the sharing charm, some of the gestures and interactions that we have as part of the operating system. Users automatically know how the operating system works. So you can take those things, put them into your application, and then they should naturally understand how your application works. So I spent a long time talking about these principles, talking about Windows Phone as well, and I was an evangelist as well, so I would go off and talk to people and tell my friends, say, hey, look at this shiny thing, look how it works, look how it moves, and get them excited by it. And one person that I had a conversation with about this is this man here, and I'm not sure does anybody know who he is? I'd be surprised. He was a mate of mine from around the corner in London. But he's actually also an architect. And about 18 months ago, I started off on a journey with this man. His name's Duncan. And it was me evangelizing Windows Phone 7 to him at the time over breakfast, my state breakfast, just so you know this wasn't beer-fueled propaganda. We were sitting there having breakfast, and I was showing him the interface and how it worked and everything. And we were talking about buildings, because I like some of these. He's a very minimalist architect. And we were talking about some of the things that architects do with buildings, and in order to get us across a sense of importance within structures. And we talk about this notion of space, how space is the ultimate luxury. If you walk into a big building and their lobby is empty and echoey, and there's a small desk with one person sitting behind it, this is a company that can afford this luxury of space. The way that they use scale within certain types of buildings in order to kind of get a sense of importance across to this. And so we talked about this, and we realised that there were parallels between the way that he approached buildings, that architects in general approach buildings, and there are parallels between the way that we create applications and we start to put these similar sort of principles into our interfaces. And that was in the morning. We went home, and later on that afternoon, he emailed me this picture. Because one of the things we were talking about was the notion of hinting that you might have heard today. The way that off to the side of these applications, and we have this on the Windows Phone too, we use cropping to indicate that there's more content over here. You can still get to somewhere else by going down here. And he sent me this picture. He said, I was thinking about the conversation we had. And I think this is a similar paradigm architecturally to that notion of hinting that you use. That's all okay. And we were having this conversation over the phone in the afternoon. He said, this is a picture from one of the Cistercian chapels in France. And he said that it was a picture he's had since he'd first studied architecture. Oh, I said archaeology. Architecture. And he said what he liked about this was the way that there's a set of steps. This is from a cloister. You walk along this corridor here. There's a beautiful sense of the way that light is used within here to highlight. Years ago, when this was a full building, there would have been a piece of art, something there for people to look at and to concentrate on. And as you went past, the only reason why you know that there's something else there is those steps. Those steps in the bottom right-hand corner, stepping upwards off to the side of the picture. They're there to tell you that there's an alternative way out of this room. There's somewhere else that you can go. And so we started having this conversation around about space and about light and about the luxury of scale and about this notion of hinting and navigating around buildings. And I thought, and this coming back to a theme that we've had across the day here today, is that no matter what it is that you do, you can always learn from other people. And so I said, well, look, do you mind if I video this conversation, if I record this conversation and see if we can get this sort of notion across to more and more people? And he said, yeah, he's up for that. So he agreed to do this, and I commissioned a very talented director by the name of Johnny Dorks to film this conversation for us. And this is where we started out.
I think space is used interestingly in sacred architecture. The use of natural light is exceptional, and the architects involved are trying to get across a higher sense of order and a connection, an emotional connection with something that isn't graspable. They play with the natural light to create exciting spaces. They use scale a lot to create a sense of wonderment.
So this was some of those parallels that we were talking about, using space and light, and using in the same way that we use that we visually reduce the amount of chrome on a screen in order to make people realise that there's a certain piece of importance. We use scale within applications to say this piece of content is more important than this piece of content.
My favourite places are the Cistercian chapels in France. There's one in Fontenay. The way it uses natural light is beautiful. There's a particular shot where there's an archway and then the light's coming obliquely from behind that. And then suddenly there's just these little steps sticking out of the corner that just suggest that there's somewhere to go and that there's something else there.
So this notion of using a piece of a building to inform someone that there's somewhere else that they can go to was the same thing we were doing within interfaces. We were saying you can hide half a piece of content here and people know there's got to be the rest of that piece of content over there because these are beautiful applications. They're not broken in that way. So it indicates the pannable area to me too. Now I think it was about this point that we were halfway through filming and Johnny says to me, he's talking about these abbeys in France. You know what's really going to make these film? We need to go to France. I thought, sounds expensive, Johnny. But Johnny and Duncan, avid bikers, use it as an excuse to buy new bicycles. And so they got on their bikes and went down to France and shot this footage. And it really kind of helps bring this notion to life. Just let Duncan finish off here. So the way he uses steps in architecture, this is a common theme, the way that we use hinting within our applications, seeing the parallels here.
You create the most beautiful space and you've done very well, pat on the back, but fundamentally things also have to work. Things like structure, lighting, electrics, audio-visual equipment, all of this has to be crammed in. It's taking all of that gubbins, all of those things, and turning it into a beautiful whole that looks like a piece of art.
So this is brilliant. Having these words come from the mouth of an architect, fundamentally, everything still needs to work. You can be brilliant and beautiful visually, but if everything doesn't actually function, if things start to fall apart behind the scenes, then this is going to quickly appear and it's going to quickly feel broken. And the same is absolutely true of applications. There used to be a time when you could hide sort of broken experiences behind playful and exciting and interesting interfaces. People would email me links to websites which was, hey, just look at this interface. Like, that's weird, I'm playing with an interface. This notion now we're actually starting to play with the content instead. There's a shift in focus here when it comes to this new style of application. But like I said, fundamentally, and in my opinion, that's before beauty, that's before finessing. If it doesn't actually work, there's no point spending the time putting that beauty on top of it, because it's only a matter of time before that gloss starts to crack and people see through it. So that was the conversation I had with Duncan. And this inspired me. And I was working with Johnny on these, and he'd just released his first feature film called Acts of Godfrey. It had Harry Enfield in it, it had Simon Callow and Geeta from EastEnders. And we were kind of riding the crest of a wave with this. We were having a good bit of fun. So we decided we'd go off and see if we could find some other people to talk about. And the thing here is that you can't be an absolute expert or a voice of authority on every single subject, so it's worth talking to other people. So there were certain areas that I felt that I wanted to explore. And this wasn't conversations with people who were evangelizing our technology on my behalf. They were just talking about what they knew. So I went off to talk to a record producer, the godfather of modern typography, a VP of a large corporation, and a man of words. And these are, so over the next sort of half hour or so, I'm going to use snippets of these films that we created just to show you, to try and get across some of the points that I think come together to make this whole sort of language that we have, this visual language that we have within this new style of application, really shine. So I'm not sure at what point it was when we switched from analog to digital, but we lost a sense of what sounded good. I don't know whether it's because analog devices just feel right because there's physics behind them. They feel right because there's genuine movement in them. Or maybe it was just that we were walking around with beans in our ears. We didn't seem to know that things were starting to sound bad. So I wanted to explore why portable audio, why mobile audio, why audio that comes out of small devices such as this, why we've made it sound so bad, how we made it sound so bad. What was once sounded great on something like this is not going to sound great when you've taken that big speaker and you've taken all the heart out of it and squashed it down into something really tiny and you've put it in your pocket. But it seemed that nobody cared. Or it seemed that nobody wanted to take advantage of this new style of device and create audio that really worked for it. If you think about our brains, they're these beautiful sort of microprocessors of really complicated information that have evolved through hundreds of thousands of years to be really attentive to little sounds that we hear, be it a crack of a twig when you're alone in a forest at night, or be it the sound of rumbling across the plains. But also because we can get a sense of emotion across to a device, it means that I can play the sound of a kick drum through a small speaker, and because I can maybe see a picture of a kick drum on that device, I know that that's what it's meant to be. So we can use brains in order to help feed into this. So I went off and I talked to this man.
My favourite noise is the noise of the world. Sound of nature. And if I have to shrink it down to one of the four elements, I'd probably say water. Partly because it's so challenging to record it and so challenging to effectively bring the sound of water out of a sound reproducing system.
This is legendary record producer and mixer Gareth Jones, at Genius Jones on Twitter. He has produced some great bands over the last 30 years or so, such as Erasure, Depeche Mode, Goldfrapp, Madness, Nick Cave, Tackhead, to just name a few. His full biography is really astounding. The thing here is that he has made those bands sound great over the last sort of 30 years or so. He knows how to make sound sound good. He's got ears. He's also quite a beard when it comes to these things. His blog details all of the old pieces of technology that he finds in the music studios that he goes to record in. And he uses words such as sound reproducing device when you and I might say speaker. For fun, he goes off to record the sounds of the world. He likes to record water. I mean, this is a man that really knows about his sound. So, I was meant to show him there. So here he is, being interviewed in a studio in West London. That's Johnny there, and his DOP. So
I enjoy complex sounds, and I find simple sounds very irritating.
And I thought, it's just Gareth that finds simple sounds irritating. We all find simple sounds irritating. Here's a selection of sounds lifted off portable devices. I'm using portable device in a very generic way here. This one. It's awful. I played that to a room full of people about... That's a beautiful sound. We'll come to those in a bit. I played that... sorry, that's the alerts, which only I can see, which you couldn't see, coming up on Josh's machine. I played that to a room full of people about 18 months ago, and someone came up to me after and said, oh, that alarm sound, that's what I use to wake me up in the morning. I love that. Do you wake up screaming and jumping out of your bed? It's like, that is not a nice noise. Why does it have to be so bad?
It's obviously really easy to irritate people. You make a sound containing energy right in the middle of the frequency band of the small speaker, and you make it as loud as possible, and you blast it out of the small speaker like a hailstone. That's interesting for about 3 seconds. After that, everyone switches off.
That's what upsets me. I don't want people to switch off. I don't know whether it was changes in technology that meant it was easier for us to turn off the sound on these devices, whether it's easier for us to control. But I think they reached a point where we decided that it's better not to hear sound than to hear bad sound. Some of those annoying... Sounds cheap, doesn't it? Sounds like... And this is maybe one of the problems, is that actually really good audio is expensive. It requires thought. I was as much to blame for this back in the early days of the web when we had... we were looking at the first time for animation, and you'd open Flash and it had a sound library. It's like everything I made had the sound of an SLR shutter as an object hit together. It was just a weird thing to do. I reused what was already there. Because audio is expensive, what I should have done was said, if I'm going to add sound to this, I'm going to go off, I'm going to create these sounds myself, so that these sounds actually fit and they actually work with the device. So here's some other weird sounds I found on... Does anybody have a dog? Does that sound like a happy dog? Or an angry dog? A dog. I think that sounds like an angry dog. Does anybody get the design joke here? The German dog kennel. Nobody gets that. The Bauhaus. I was going to give you a prize for that. Oh, you have to wait for that later on then. But I don't understand why you'd do this. I don't understand why you'd want a phone that made noise like a dog. That notion of digital authenticity that I mentioned at the very start, these are digital devices. That is not a digital sound. Here's another one. If my phone made that noise, I'd be looking for a spring, even though if I knew that it was my phone. If I dropped it on the floor and it made that noise, I might laugh a little bit until I realise it's broken. But that's not authentically digital. That's not the sort of sound that I'm expecting from one of these devices. And also, I think it sounds okay through the speakers and the AV that we've got here, but when you put that onto a small device, it doesn't sound like a spring unless I can see a spring. It doesn't sound like a dog much. It sounds just like a weird animal noise. So we need to think about the speaker. We need to think about being authentic to these devices.
Bringing complexity, timbrally, and dynamic range to a small device is super challenging, obviously. And I guess we're just at the beginning of making this work really well.
The beginning of making this work really well, and I think it's true. We're starting to realise that we can get some really good sound out of these small devices. This one thing I just wanted to pull up here. So here's some keyboard sounds. I'm going to touch this first one, which is made of one. Some of you may recognise this from a... That's the keyboard sound from someone's device. It's the same noise throughout the time. The only sort of variation you get within that is depending on whether it's the users themselves actually typing it. This second sound down the bottom here, made of many, this is the sound that we have on Windows Phone from the keyboard. It's the sound we also have on Windows 8 for the keyboard. And see if you notice the difference here. It's actually... Or do we all have beans in our ears again? It's actually made up of about 7 or 8, 9 different sounds, so that means that as you're typing, each sound sounds different, so you don't feel you have to turn it off. It's also got some those slightly higher pitches. If I press the shift button, I get one of those higher pitches. If autocorrect kicks in, I get a slightly higher, different pitch in there. It means I can type quicker. It means that I'm getting this audible response from a device that's saying, you're doing it right, or I know that I can type quicker because I'm getting this audible response to it. But it's like walking down an alleyway with sort of hard shoes on. Each footstep you take is slightly different. Nothing, and I know I'm saying we want to be authentically digital, but also we need to have, everything comes from a grounding in nature in some way. When it comes to motion, we think about physics and we look to nature. If I was to hold a tennis ball and drop it to the floor and it just hit the floor and didn't bounce as if it had the mass of the moon, that would be a pretty weird thing. So in the same way with sound, if it doesn't feel like it's got a bit of nature in there, it feels a little bit false.
One of the great ways of learning about effectively bringing feelings through a sound reproduction device is just to listen to what you yourself are doing and what other people are doing with the same device, and constantly tweak your work in order to try and maximize the emotional connection between the application and the user. Because once we can establish an emotional bond between application and user, we're in.
If you want to hear Gareth talk about how to make really good sound, you have to go and watch the whole of that film. It can basically summarise as follows, though. So use dynamic range, use bits of loud and quiet within the sounds, use varying frequencies, and try and get across that sense of emotional bonding. If I just play some of these sounds that I've got on here, for instance, this is lifted off. It's got dynamic range in there. It's something that it can cut through a noisy room because it's interruptive. The other way of cutting through just by making a really awful sound, like Gareth says, in the middle of the sound spectrum that just can be irritating. So when it comes to sound, think about how you can be clever with the sound. Think about how you can create new sounds specifically for your application. Don't just open the drawer marked sound effects and just pick something out of there. It's not what we want to do. The next film that I wanted to make is... someone emailed me this the other day, and something that Bill said this morning is sometimes you have to know the rules in order to break them. I think I've names completely skipped my mind. Les Dawson did this brilliantly when he was playing the piano, and he was playing it really badly. You have to be able to play the piano really well in order to make it comedy in that way, make it sound so bad. So in order to until something breaks, sometimes you don't realise it's broken. This is by a very talented creative director out from Dubai called Shahir Zag. Go to his site. He's got some very beautiful examples, but this was something that sent me. Because what I wanted to do, I wanted to explore this notion of typography when we're talking about pride in craftsmanship. So I went to interview this man here in the white shirt. His name's Eric Speakman. He is what I refer to as the godfather of modern typography. He's being interviewed there by a chap from Bristol. Does anybody know who that is? Elliot J. Stocks. Who said that? You get a book. On typography, nonetheless. Is anybody else here who's a real type fan? Hey, you got a hand in the air straight away. First hand gets it. Can you catch? So I wanted to interview Eric about this notion of pride in craftsmanship and about pixels and about grids and about typography that's laid out on the screen, but I didn't really feel I was qualified to do this in the same way that someone like Elliot was. Also, I knew that Elliot had been working with Eric, and so I thought the two of them together would just be for a more interesting conversation. So I asked them to sit down and have a little chat.
So Eric, in your life, you've seen all these different ages of typography, you know, of metal type and film through to digital. What excites you about digital typography right now?
I think the proper term is convergence. I just simply call the web guys on them finally finding out what typography is all about. You know, we've had something that we've developed over, say, 500 years from that German guy invented printing with movable type. So we get in there. I've always maintained that the screen is just bad paper. So the screens will look like paper, they'll feel like paper, so we'll design them like paper. And I predict, you can quote me on this, in 2 years' time we won't have a distinction between web design and print design. The way to design is the same. You give content form. And the medium really is always different anyway, whether it's substrate, plastic, paper, cardboard, I don't really care.
So I like this, convergence, expect convergence, convergence between devices. We can get synergy across devices in the same way we have from phone to Xbox dashboard through to this new style of application on Windows 8. We should be giving content form and just making sure that we are appreciating some of these principles all the way through our designs and the way that we're building these applications. Treating everything as if it is paper, because essentially there's some grounding principles here that have been around for many, many years.
I always have to laugh when people are making this big deal, oh my God, I've only got whatever, 1200 pixels at my disposal. I remember designing the little forms for medication, the little things that go inside. That's the same issue. I mean, I have a small piece of paper, which is whatever, 5 by 10 centimeters or even smaller. You have a lot of type to get into there. People will be reading it in difficult circumstances. They may have a headache, they may be sick, and their life may depend on taking these pills. So that's the constraint, about as heavy as working for a mobile phone, which is a pretty amazing screen that may even give me moving images. But essentially, I've got to cram a lot of complex content into a given format, however small that may be. I don't see any difficult issues there. It's just same as always. You solve the problem, you think about the users, you think about the issue at hand, how much information, how do people read, when do they read, why do they read, do they have to read? Can they read? Must they read? If I want to take a train.
He likes to talk to Tesh speak, but it's quite difficult to cut him off at points. But it's interesting. I like what he says here, is that there are always different challenges. There are always different form factors, and sometimes people can moan about these. But then I think that we as digital designers, we just have to embrace this and say, this is the nature of the beast that we've decided to work with, and we've got to accept these challenges and work with them.
Yes, as you mentioned, I'm an old git. I've been doing this for a while. I find it quite amusing that people are now discovering grids, for example. I've used grids since I was 12, essentially, because that's all you had when you did metal type. I mean, the whole technology itself is a grid, and you had to work in units and increments. So I'm quite amused by the fact that these web designers are now discovering this stuff. So far, they've been bogged down by having to look at code all the time, having to make sure that it works across platform. That's all gone. So now they can actually look at the problem, and that's why I said in a few years' time, however long it may take the individuals, they'll design for the issue at hand and not for the medium.
Another great one there, design for the issue at hand, not the medium. It's really nice to hear somebody who's so focused on typography talk about the user. It's something else that we were talking about at the very start of the day that's followed as a theme throughout the day. The user is really important when it comes to here. Design for the issue, not the medium. And this heritage of the grid that he's talking about, we've had them for years. They're present in almost every publication that you see. It means that we have, it makes things feel not broken. It gives a sense of form and structure to it. It's what enables us to understand the hierarchy of information. Once we combine grids and typography, we can easily understand the importance of information within a particular screen. This is not new thinking in the same way that we're just borrowing on the learnings. We're making it better. We're making it a lot better.
Yes, I do consider myself a typography designer as opposed to a graphic designer. A typography designer starts by looking at the copy. So what is your smallest element? The copy, maybe even the footnotes. And then you go up from there. Whereas the graphic designer has an image in his or her head. Like, this page is going to look whatever, blue and sort of wobbly. And then the graphic designer will make that page look blue and wobbly with whatever means it takes. As a typographic designer, you first define, the type. The actual type itself, the size, the leading, and then you move upwards. Then you have a column, and then you say, how many hierarchies do I have? And so I work myself up from the first decision, which is probably the copy, like 9 point on whatever 12, or in my case 4.5 millimeters or something. And then everything works out from there. And this is exactly how web designers have always worked anyway. In a way, it designs itself. You make a very few decisions there. But every decision brings a couple more decisions with it, and in the end, it's quite logical. Doesn't mean it can't look elegant at the same time, but there's a lot of logic in there. It's not just, you know, I wake up with the layout coming on kind of thing.
Clearly does, though, doesn't it? It's one of my favourite things I've ever heard a designer say. It's not like a wake up with a layout coming on. But these are ideas that are baked into this new style of application. So this notion of hierarchy within information. I don't know if you saw this type ramp that Josh put up briefly earlier on. These are there and they're present within Windows 8 applications. They're there in the templates in Visual Studio that you can take advantage of. It's not new thinking by us. This is just taking the years of experience of many, many talented people. One of the other notions that's come out today, and I don't know if Bill's still here, but I'm going to credit him with this. I'm not sure where it came from. I'm pretty sure I heard him say it years ago, say the most important technology to understand is the human. We're in this very user-centered world. We need to understand the experience as a whole, not an individual's interaction with a screen at a particular moment in time. In order to do that, I think you need to understand the human. You need to understand what it is they're doing, where they're doing it, why they're doing it. So I approached Nikki Barton, who is the Vice President of User Interaction across Nokia, and wanted to just get her comments briefly about how she recognises users, the experience and the scenarios before building applications.
It's really key for developers to understand the user experience and really not focus on the technology. It's really important not to think about the technology when you first start thinking about how users want to, you know, the result, how users want to get something out of it.
So every project I work on, it always starts with the user scenario. I think about how a person is going to approach a device, how they're going to approach a particular piece of software. And I really believe this is what makes a product work really great. I always have these scenarios that I refer back to again and again during the build of a project, because I think if I'm making sure that I'm fulfilling those scenarios, it's giving me a focus. It means that I'm going to, if my product is focusing on supporting those scenarios I decided on up front, it's going to make sure that my product is focused and it's going to work really beautifully.
When I start to think about people's situations, I actually spend a lot of time watching, seeing how people are using devices, how they're using technology, and try and think as they really do, not to think as a designer might. You have to think of how your family thinks, think about how my daughter does, think about how my milkman does, to really try and work out what they want to do, how they want things to work, and that really helps get to a good design solution.
And this is brilliant, because this is this notion of synergy that we've heard about today as well, how you can't just have designers and developers working in silos. Hey, if you introduce the business people to that team as well, it means you can make a decision that's going to work for everyone. I've come from a background in advertising agencies where you would have very siloed disciplines, and someone would do their part and then hand it off to the next part and hand it off to the next part. And it can be really difficult. If you're working in distributed teams where people don't have an understanding, at least, of your discipline, then when it comes to your part in that project, it can be really difficult. Everybody needs to talk, and everybody needs to be aware of each other's disciplines. Designers need to understand the constraints that developers are faced with. They both need to understand the constraints of the business and be sympathetic to those. Ultimately, it's the business that's paying for whatever it is that they're doing anyway. So the final piece that I wanted to touch on is, I think, is one of the easiest things that you can fix in your applications. And I think it's bigger than just your application. It's something that spreads across every single touch point where it is that you're talking to or and coming into contact with your consumer, with your customer. And I think it's rare for anybody outside of a large organisation to consider this. It's quite common for large organisations to consider tone of voice and to have a document that says this is how you speak to people. The problem is then within large organisations, you've got lots of people trying to speak to people. And so sometimes it can come across maybe as a bit schizophrenic. So I wanted to talk to a creative director that I worked with for many years, and we produced award-winning work together, and he was just the most passionate person I ever met, and he was just brilliant the way he talked about it. He's really passionate about words, and he would spend what I would consider far too long writing 5 words. They were 5 words, but he would do it brilliantly. His name's Nigel Edgington Vigus. I couldn't say his name back then either.
of voice means to me the ability for a brand to communicate with an appropriate personality.
That's all it is. It's about communicating with an individual personality. One of the best examples, one of my favourite people that do this, is Innocent. They have messages on the bottom of each of their cartons. Don't be surprised to find me in newsagents doing this and giggling to myself. I think it's brilliant. Every single moment that they touch a consumer, they're interesting with the way they use words. Go to their website and check through the examples that they've got up there. They're beautiful and brilliant.
I always think about, as someone, a human being, they each have their own conversational quirk, a personality, something that makes them different and unique. If you're a brand, if you can actually identify and recognise what that quirk or what that affectation or what that point of difference really is, that will naturally give you your tone of voice.
So this is Innocent again. I don't know if you can read it on this screen. It should be able to be clear on the side screens. It's a bit bright here. I carried this around in my wallet for months. Why, I don't know. I just always thought it would probably come in useful one day, and so I photographed this in my kitchen a few days ago. I'm going to read it for you. So it's heating instructions for one of the Innocent hot pots. And the top one says, this is how to cook it in the microwave, certain temperature for a period of time. The middle one says, here's how to cook it on the hob. You heat it up in a pan. The bottom one says, around the campfire, pour contents into cooking pot, sing campfire songs until bubbling nicely. It's just that element of surprise. It makes you smile. You didn't need to put that in there, but when you're reading that and you're sitting in, and it's something spinning in front of the microwave, that's just something that makes you smile and gives you a little bit of joy.
I think trust from a brand is a major thing. Advertisers tend to spend millions and millions of pounds trying to make friends with people. It's like, come to me, we want your business. Very, very chatty, very friendly, and then you go online, and it suddenly feels almost as if it's a different person. It's almost like you've just finished this amazing lovemaking session and you lie back in contented bliss and your partner just turns to you and says, affirmative, you have now been logged out. Thank you.
It's true. The way that we talk to people within applications, the way that we give them error messages, I think is really weird sometimes. This is, to carry the theme through again, this is Innocent's headquarters in London. The door for people, the window for burglars. At every single point where you meet this brand, they're really consistent with the way that they talk to you. I phoned them up to get permission to use that last picture, and I was really surprised by the way they answered the phone. And I'm hoping they answer the phone the same way now for me here. Can you hear that? Where is it? Hope they're not watching live.
Oh, Innocent Banana Phone.
Did you hear that? I spoke at the wrong time. He says, hello, Innocent Banana Phones. Like, even when they pick up the phone, they're passionate about this. I think it's really great. It's one of those small things that really just can give a little bit of joy to your application. Every time you touch a consumer, no matter where it is, try and be consistent with this. As I say, I think it's one of the easiest things that you can do when it comes to creating really beautiful applications.
I think as marketers and brands, we often think of the consumer as this sort of intellectually challenged lump of humanity. But, we're writing to our own friends, family members. They're people with names, they're people with relationships, and they deserve to be talked to and treated with some respect.
So that's true. I love everything that he says in this film. It's one of my favourites that I think I've made over this series of 6 that are out there at the moment. This is a screenshot from Last FM. I think I must have taken this probably about 2 years ago because it stopped streaming music a while back. I'd nipped off for lunch. I came back to my computer. When I came back, it came up with this message. First thing, it's visually arresting. It's not just a standard JavaScript message within the browser that says something's gone wrong, yes or no. It's got a picture of a bear in it. We'd hate for Quincy Jones, Nick Drake, Stevie Wonder, Electric Light Orchestra, Elliott Smith to fall on deaf ears. That's the music I listen to. This is personalised to me. We hope you're still there, but just in case you've wandered off, received a long-distance phone call or been eaten by a bear. It's nice, it's personalised, it's to me, it's really entertaining. I really like the way they do this. I think it's just another really nice piece by
Digital, I think people are used to bypassing certain processes. But I think if you can manage that process digitally and ensure that you don't hold people up at every level, which annoys everyone, where they normally expect speed and efficiency and brevity, I think there's some little things that you can put in there to communicate with people and really convey a brand. So it might just be welcome. It might just be, you know, the way that you log into a password, for example. It's just like, hi, welcome to. Right, okay, you know, it feels like someone's talking to me now. And even the way you log out, for example. Again, if it was a relationship, you met someone, you were chatting to them, and they just turned their back on you and walked away, well, you know, it's a very rude interaction. But, you know, apps and banners and various other applications kind of do that every day, and I don't think it has to be that way.
No, I don't think it has to be that way either. I think there was a long time where we got things a little bit wrong. I'm joking here. I put that there on purpose. It's a screenshot. Because, I mean, for instance, here, what error 00010E36? That probably means something to about 2 people on the planet. I shouldn't have to deal with that error message. Here's something that we have instead within this new Windows 8 world. It's more friendly. It's a little less scary. I think that's something really important. So when it comes to tone of voice, just a couple of tips that I'd give you. Does it sound like it comes from a friend? Is this a friendly tone? Is this something that I would want to read? It's something that I would want to read myself. Is it playful? And be playful where you need to be. I don't want a playful bank. So think about the situation where it's going to be. Hey, you're over your overdraft. Only joking. Don't use computerese. When it comes to error messages, give people something logical that means something to them, something that they know why this has gone wrong. And the final point that Nigel mentioned there, understand where you are. Because you know, because this is digital, you know whereabouts in the whole sort of process and the communication you are with a person. You can say good morning, you say good evening, and you can say thank you for your purchase at the end of an interaction. Be nice to people through tone of voice. There's a URL here, bit.ly/whack design film playlist. That would take you through to a URL for all of the films. There's 6 up there, and there's one which I didn't show you any snippets from because I thought it would be really worth just having something that's completely new there. I've only shown you maybe 10% of the content of those films within there, so they really are worth going to and taking a look at. I've got another 2 which are being made at the moment. So when it comes to this new style of application, think pride and craftsmanship. Think about the type. Think about the grid that's in the background. It's not new thinking. It's something that's been there for a long time. Fast and fluid when it comes to your animations. When it comes to the language that you're using, make sure there's a fluid experience from start to finish. Think with digital authenticity. Recognise these are digital devices. Recognise these are pixels on a screen. Take advantage of the digital nature of the things that we're working with. Do more with less. Reduce that chrome. Let's use space. Let's use light. Let's use these things that we're seeing in the physical world in order to make our applications really sort of feel like they belong to these devices. And to belong to these devices, we have to take advantage of the whole of Windows. Look to the charms. Look to the interactions that we've got in there. And win as one with the entire operating system. Thank you for listening to me. That's my name, that's my email address, that's me on Twitter. I will be around for a little bit afterwards. If you want to come and have a chat, I'm always willing to talk to people. Thank you.